You all realize now that whoever speaks from behind the podium, they never speak for AA as a whole. And when she said they would welcome constructive criticism, she was talking about the committee, not necessarily me and Joe. I never have been able to take constructive criticism very well, but I'm slowly learning. Sometimes at these big book studies, I find things in my big book that I have no idea how they got there from time to time. The last big book study Joe and I did, I found this in my book when I got home. And it was to people that are feeling bad. It said, "This will make you feel better." It said, if you sometimes get discouraged, consider this fellow. He dropped out of grade school. He ran a country store. He went broke. He took 15 years to pay off his bills. He took a wife, had an unhappy marriage, ran for the House of Representatives, lost twice, ran for Senate, lost twice, delivered a speech that became a classic, audience completely indifferent, attacked daily by the press and despised by half the country. Despite all this, imagine how many people all over the world have been inspired by this awkward, rumpled, brooding man who signed his name simply A. Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. I don't really know where I got that. When we stopped before this last session, we had finished up with step 10. And we were talking about the fact that the last three steps, 10, 11, and 12, that we felt that they were growth steps rather than maintenance steps. Hopefully we were able to see how through the use of step 10 as the book has it laid out, that rather than maintain, we would continue to grow. That by practicing 10 and where we would continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, that we would continually learn more about ourselves and our defects of character, and that as we ask God to take them away, that we would continually improve in that area because the defects would be becoming less and less. And as we discuss them with another human being, we learn more and more about ourselves. And as we made amends quickly to those that we had harmed, our relationship with other people would become better and better. And I think we can see that as we practice 10 that way, we'll be in a continual state of growth for as long as we use that. Then we looked at the promises which came after 10, the promises regarding our sanity, which would give us our new attitude toward alcohol. And it was plain to see with that new attitude toward alcohol, then the obsession to drink had been removed. No longer do we believe the lie. No longer do we think that we can drink. And I expect I know me about as well as anybody in the world knows me, and I know that if I had to fight that obsession every day, on a daily basis, I know exactly what I'd do. I'd end up going back to drink. That's what I always did before. But because this obsession has been removed and it's no longer necessary to drink, we no longer need to drink, we no longer want to drink, and if tempted by alcohol, we recoil from it as if from a hot flame. And this is the real miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, the removal of the obsession of the mind. No human power has been able to do that for us. We tried many ways before coming to AA. And it seems as though through the aid of a power greater than we are, the obsession is removed and we no longer have to drink. Then we begin to talk a little bit about this spiritual program of action and how easy it is to let up on it. We talked a little bit about every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. How can I best serve Thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And these are the thoughts which must go with us constantly. And the book said we can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the will. And then as Joe pointed out, here in the beginning of step 11 or at the ending of step 10, we see how our will has been returned back to us. We made the decision to turn it over in 3, and gradually through steps 4 through 10, we removed self. And as the garbage was cleaned out and taken away, and self was removed more and more and more, then gradually our will began to be directed by this power greater than we are. And now then it tells us we can have our will back and we can use our will, because now that sanity has been returned to us, then we now know what to do with this thing. Now in that last paragraph on that page 85, it said, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. Can't you just see Bill Wilson smiling as he penned out this paragraph? He got to say directions twice within one paragraph. And to some extent we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. But we must go further, and that means more action. And here the book begins to talk about a sixth sense of direction. You know, prior to coming to AA, everything that I knew in my mind on the conscience level that I could use in dealing with life in general had all been taught to me or received by me from my normal 5 senses of direction. And we've all read and heard about the normal 5 senses that all human beings have. The sense of sight, feel, touch, taste, and hearing. And everything that I've ever known throughout my lifetime on a conscious level, I had received it through one of those 5 senses. Even through my ears, or through tasting something, or feeling something, and etc. But the book now begins to talk about a vital 6th sense of direction. And it says we have begun to develop this 6th sense of direction already. But it says we must go further. And that means more work yet. And in this paragraph, it makes a statement that much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and power. Well, now, if God has all knowledge and power, and I believe He does, and if God dwells within each of us, and I believe He does, that's what my book tells me, that deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, and it's only there that He may be found, then that means to me that deep down inside me somewhere, usually at a subconscious level, then I also have access to all knowledge and all power. I've never been able to use it before in my life because it was always obscured by the race for money, power, prestige, sex, and etc. And I've never known how to tap into that power. I think I've known that it has always been there because there's always been some innate knowledge and intelligence within ourselves which seemed to have always told us what we should do and what we shouldn't do and how we should live. But we were simply never able to follow that particular piece of information. Now, if I can tap into that power, which my book says I'm already beginning to do, then within me I seem to have the knowledge and experience and power that I need to be able to direct myself throughout the rest of my lifetime if I can simply bring it to the surface. And if you remember way back in the beginning, we said one of the reasons or purposes of the steps was to peel away that garbage, to get rid of that self-will, and to get rid of all those things that have stood between us and that inherent knowledge. And now that the garbage is peeled away, now that the self-will is gone to a certain extent, then just maybe we can start bringing that information to the surface. And if we can bring it to the surface from the subconscious into the conscious mind, then we can begin to receive the directions that we really need in how to conduct our life. Now, the spiritual experience in the back of the book said this, that I would become aware of the fact that I had had a spiritual experience when I become aware of the fact that I have tapped an unsuspected inner resource of strength that I would presently identify with a power greater than myself, or God as I understand Him. And if I can tap into that inner resource, then most certainly I can find the information that I need to live with. And to my absolute amazement, when I reached this part of my program, I realized that I don't have to go find any other information. I don't have to go read any other books. I don't have to know any more about spirituality than I already know, because I've got all the information that I need in order to know how to live if I can just bring it to the surface and follow it. Now, this next step is going to show us how to improve that conscious contact that we've already established, not maintain it, but improve it. And it's going to show us how to bring to the surface this information that we already know in order to be able to direct ourselves in the future. And I found that when I got to step 11 again, I was in serious trouble. Because it does say we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And I found that when I got to step 11, I really didn't know anything about prayer, and I most certainly didn't know anything about meditation. Now, you would think, being raised in a good church, that I would know how to pray. But I find out that I didn't know how to pray. And here I am, 40 years old, when I first came to AA, and I'm faced with the knowledge that I simply don't know how to pray and meditate. Oh, I had some prayers that I'd used all my life. I think one of them was one I seem to have known it forever, and it went something like this. It said, "Now I'll lay me down to sleep, and I pray the Lord my soul to keep, and if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." And I don't really like that prayer anymore, because that's dealing with dying, and I'm not really too much into that today. Another prayer that I had that I used an awful lot during my life, and I'm sure some of you probably used the same prayer, and it was something like this. It said, "God, if you'll get me out of this damn mess, I swear I'll never do it again." And that was about the knowledge and the extent of my prayer. So again, I had to turn to this sponsor of mine, and I had to say, "I've got a problem here. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to pray. I don't know how to meditate. Can you help me?" And he said, "Why, yeah, Charlie." He said, "Prayer and meditation is a very simple matter." He said, "Prayer is nothing in the world but talking to God, and meditation is nothing in the world but listening for the answer." And I said, "Great, fine, but how do you do that?" And he said, "Let me make some suggestions to you." And he took me to the big book again, and he took me to page 86, 87, and 88. And he said, "If you will follow the suggestions made on these 3 pages," he said, "you will be able to develop a life of prayer and meditation which will put you in conscious contact with God, and which will keep you in conscious contact with God, and which will develop this vital 6th sense of information that you've already got, but you just don't know how to use it." And again, I found out that he was exactly right. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. And we shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. Joe?
Okay. As we begin with step 11, I think we need to put it in its right perspective of what this step is all about. Not to say that any one of these steps are more important than the other, but step 3 is one of the foundations of the whole program. And step 3 and 11. In step 3, we made a decision to turn over our will. Then we made take some actions to clear away the things that block us off from God. And we did this in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and continue to do it for a period of time with step 10. Now, after clearing those things away with those action steps, we receive God's will. So the foundation of the whole thing would be the turning over our will, clearing away the things that block us, and then the receiving of God's will. So this brings us to prayer and meditation. And Bill says, it would be easy to be vague about this matter. And we'd have to think about where he was at this time with the writing of the book. And the thing that we do have to work with it is unbelievable that it was written this way. Bill was not a spiritual giant at this time, in 1938. He just had about 3 years of sobriety. His earlier teachings about spirituality came from Henrietta and Ann, who read to him out of the Bible. During this time, he had probably spent some time around the Oxford group meetings, and Sam Shoemaker developing his life. But still yet, he wasn't a spiritual giant. Well, here he was faced with writing a section of our book to deal with prayer and meditation. He had the awesome opportunity of attempting to write a program or a set of directions to give spirituality to a group of people that was spiritually bankrupt. And if we looked at these two subjects in their vastness, both of them are very vast subjects. And we can think about all the literature and the words that have been written on prayer since the beginning of time. Man has dealt extensively with this subject. There's also been a lot of work and study done on meditation. And he had no background, yet he had to write on subjects like this. And he said he would like to be vague about it, but we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. Now, since Bill was not a giant in the talk and to teach us spirituality or prayer and meditation, he didn't attempt to teach us prayer and meditation because he didn't have the ability. Well, the way he was able to do it, he said, I'm going to give you some definite and valuable suggestions to practice on a daily basis. And if you practice these suggestions on a daily basis, then you will develop a life of prayer and meditation. But he did give us some definite and valuable suggestions that we can practice on a daily basis. And if anybody, regardless of where we at in prayer and meditation, if we can practice these on a daily basis, over a period of time, we will develop a healthy life of prayer and meditation. And he will tell us these definite and valuable suggestions on these pages. He will tell us what to do when we retire at night. He will tell us what we do when we awake in the morning. He'll tell us what we do when we face indecisions throughout the day. He will tell us how to pray, or what to do when we're in doubt, or agitated. And if we practice these principles every day, day in and day out, throughout our day, you'd be surprised in a short period of time, we all can develop a healthy life of prayer and meditation. And he said that, I think this is one of the most, Bill said that this particular step, this particular section of the program was, of all the things that he learned, one of the most powerful tools he learned in his life was the use of prayer and meditation in a healthy way. And he said that all his life he had not been able to use prayer and meditation. Neither had I. He said he had used prayer by itself as an instrument to sway God's will and lift his petty needs. And this is what I had done all my life. I had just used one side of the thing. It's like a telephone trying to do business with the talking end and not the listening end. And I never was successful. I always tried to sway God's will and lift my petty needs. I didn't know how to use prayer and direction together as a tool. And if we practice these suggestions throughout each day, we will finally develop ability to use prayer and meditation as two successful tools in our lives. It starts off at night. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking what we could do for others, of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflections, for that will diminish our usefulness to others. After making my review, we ask God's forgiveness and for what corrective measures should be taken.
Now, a final handout sheet. And again, this is not something new, nor is an attempt to bring something else in AA from an outside source. If you'll notice on the left-hand side of this sheet, we have simply listed the personality characteristics of a self-will person. And the selfish, self-centered, self-willed person will usually have obvious manifestations of that. Certain things that show that. And we've already looked at some of them. We looked at them when we took our inventory. We looked at such things as resentments and fears and harms we do to others. We looked at the exact nature of those wrongs, and we found that within our character we usually had such things as selfish, such things as dishonesty, such things as being frightened, such things as being inconsiderate of other people. Those were the four basic character defects that Bill talked about all the way through the book, all the way from step 4 on through. Then when he wrote the 12 and 12, 13 years later, surely he knew more about human nature then. He had worked with literally hundreds of alcoholics. He had talked to some people who were quite knowledgeable in this field, and he had learned much more about human nature. And in the 12 and 12, he gave us a whole lot of other character defects. And he listed those as such things as pride and greed and lust and anger and envy and sloth and gluttony. He talked about such things as impatience and intolerance and resentment and hate and etc. And usually the selfish, self-centered person is the one who has those things as a part of their personality or a part of their character. And what we've been trying to do is get rid of those things in our life and become more like a God-will person. And on the right-hand side of the sheet, we have the personality characteristics of God's will or a God-will person. And I found in many instances I knew so little about that even though I might have known what the character defect was, I didn't know what the opposite was. So we went into the dictionaries again and looked up the opposite of these things and came up with the characteristics of a God-will person. And if I want to get rid of selfishness and self-seeking, then I will need to become interested in others. And if I want to get rid of dishonesty, then I'll need to try to be honest. And so on and so forth, right down the line. What I've been trying to do within my life as I work these steps and use this program is get from the left-hand side of the sheet to the right-hand side of the sheet. Now, you can talk to almost anybody who is successful at whatever their business might be. And they'll almost always tell you that we make inventory a daily part of our lives. They say if we don't stop and look back at where we came from, if we don't stop and look and see where we are at the present time, and if we don't stop and look where we're going in the future, then we may forget the whole mess and get all fouled up. And most successful people will tell you they do inventory on a daily basis. And our book suggests that we do this ourselves. In step 11 it says when we retire at night. I really don't think it makes much difference whether we do it in 11 or 12 as long as we do it. And it says we carefully review our day. And we can take something like this little sheet of paper, and we can run down that sheet of paper and make the appropriate check marks on whichever side they belong on. And within a couple of minutes we can see what we've been that day. We can see what it is we need to try to change for the future. And we can ask God's help and try to bring these changes about. And again, gradually, slowly, we will change. It would be impossible to stay the way we are if we would do this inventory on a daily basis and try to make the changes necessary to get from the left-hand side of the sheet to the right-hand side of the sheet. And as I do this at night, I find to my amazement that never am I all the way on either side of the sheet. Well, some days I'm mainly on the left side. Other days maybe I've got a few more on the right side. But never do I live completely on either side of the sheet. Some days I find what I changed on the left-hand side will come back in a week or two or three. Or the next day I find different character defects come back. But as we gradually work on these things, our personality continues to go through the refining process. Character defects become less and less and less. The personality change becomes deeper and deeper and deeper, and we become different people. Again, it would be impossible to do this using a sheet similar to this or any other sheet, by the way, and stay the way we are. We're going to continue to change. And the first suggestion the book makes is that we make this a part of our life. We do this on a daily basis. And here it suggests we do that when we go to bed at night by reviewing our day. Nope.
And this is a valuable daily suggestion. Now the next one is in the morning. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day before we begin. We ask God to direct our thinking. And this is a process of organizing our lives. And it's something that we alcoholics, I know, can only speak myself as an alcoholic that I never had in my life. I never had any organization in my life. An alcoholic has got the most disorganized life you ever saw. My old sponsor told me in the early days, I never have forgotten it. He said, "Joe, you're just like a duck, you know." He said, you get up in the morning and you squawk and you crap and you say, "Here I come, mean old world," you know, and you just flop out there and let them bat you around all day and, you know, and this, you know. And, well, you know, it means to have our little plans and designs. It doesn't say that it has to work, but we got a business to run. And each day, you know, we run the biggest business in the world. In the morning, we consider our plans for the day before we begin. And we ask God to direct our thinking. That's the main thing we need. And I wonder about, you know, many of us as people, you know, we get up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we take a shower, and we got to select everything to put on, and everything got to match the right color. Some of y'all have to comb your hair. I don't have that problem, but you know, you got to do all these little things and put on the deodorant and get everything just right. Good. And I wonder how many times we get work on all these other things that are so much important to us and do nothing about the main thing, our mind. What do we do about our minds? Do we take better care of our teeth than we do our minds? And this is the thing that runs the whole show. So we need to look at that. That's the most important thing we need to get together. He says, especially as we've divorced from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental facilities with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains. And I ask, alcoholics every day, we all got great minds. I've never seen a dumb alcoholic. I see us do some dumb things. But we got great minds. When we can get this garbage out of the way, then we can use our minds. And we don't live off our minds, we live off our feelings. Now, I ask alcoholics all the time, look at your life and then look at your mind. Is your life as good as your mind? Mine never is. My mind's better than my life. And if I can get this thing out of the way, then I'm trying to make my life as good as my mind.
Now, this thing says, after all, God gave us brains to use. And that kind of brings us to one more little story that we'll tell before we finish this thing up. And always it's dealing with an alcoholic or something in that area. And Joe and I heard the story recently about the brain surgeon who had developed a way to transplant brains in their entirety. We've been doing it with certain organs of the body for quite some years, and this fellow figured out how to do it with the brain in its entirety. And this older fellow went to this brain surgeon. He said, "Doc," he said, "I'm having trouble with my old brain." And said, "Doesn't work like it ought to, and I can't remember like I should, and seem like I'm not as intelligent as I used to be." And he said, "I wonder if you could do anything for me." And the brain surgeon said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "We'll run some tests, and if you're a good candidate, well, we'll most certainly can. But we'll have to find out first." So the old man went and went a series of tests, and when they got through, the brain surgeon said, "Fine, you're okay." He said, "Physically, I think it'd work great." He said, "I believe we could transplant another brain in your head, and it would just be fine." The old fellow said, "Well, great." He said, "What have you got to offer?" And the brain surgeon said, "Well, let's go in the display room, and I'll show you what we have in stock." They went inside the display room, and he looked in a showcase over here, and he said, "Now, here we have the brains of an attorney." And he said, "I could probably transplant this in your head, and everything would be fine, and it would cost you about $20,000. The old man said, "Well, have you got anything else to offer?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Over in this case over here, we have the brains of a doctor." And he said, "I could probably transplant this in your head, and it would cost you $50,000. The old man said, "Well, have you got anything else to offer?" And he said, "Oh, yes. In this case over here, I've got the brains of an alcoholic." And he said, "I could transplant this brain in your head, and everything would be fine. It'd cost you about $100,000. The old man said, "I don't understand." He said, "How come you charge $20,000 for the lawyer, $50,000 for the doctor, and $100,000 for the alcoholic's brain?" And the brain surgeon said, "Why, hell, man, it's brand new. It ain't never been used yet." I think most of us have still got 25 or 30,000 miles left on the original warranty.
And it really is. I mean, we have to be honest. We'll never really use it. We'll never really use it. Okay. But when our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. I remember as a new alcoholic in my first year of sobriety, and I just love. I don't want to go back through the struggle, but I can look back on the excitement of it and all the things that happened to me in that first year. And I remember my first experience when my thinking was cleared of wrong motives, and I dawned on me that I could really think. One time I thought something was wrong with me, but when I really began to experience good thought, clear thought to work my way through things. And one day I don't know what it was, I had some kind of little problem. It wasn't much, I don't remember what it was, but it had me, it was a bigger biggie for me. Instead of me acting like I usually act with fear and emotion and all the frustrations, I actually sat down for the first time that I could remember and thought my way through it and worked it out just fine. And that was the first time I could remember in my sobriety of having that too, and just the thrill of being able to do that. I was so excited and felt so good. And in a few minutes I had a silly idea. I said, "Boy, I wish I had another problem so I could do that again." That was fun. That was fun. Okay. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. And this is true. Each day we face indecisions, and we really put our life, we're not running the show anymore. We begin to see ourselves in the perspectives we are on the face of this earth. Each of us is a person, we're just here for just a few years of time. We think about the total expanse of time that this world exists and the complexity of this world. We are just minute when it comes to this total world's existence and the whole scheme of things. And we are limited. We are very limited. I don't know why we think we're so smart, but if you knew it all that all men know, you wouldn't know much, because we as humans know very little about the whole thing. And we come into things that we don't know about, and when I have the experiences, something that comes up, I have a series of experiences and knowledge that I have been exposed to in a short period of time of my life, and this is the information that I have to run my life on. And each day, when I come into contact with things, I have a lot of things that come up that I haven't experienced. I don't have the knowledge from. I do not know it all. And when I run into these things, I face indecision. And usually when I have a problem or I run into something, quite naturally, I'll go into my experience or into my memory bank. My memory bank is very limited. I got a little computer up here that has recorded all the knowledge, the things I learned and experiences. So when something comes up, I turn on my little computer. And I don't think it takes about 30 seconds for the tape to run out, and it says, we don't know that, and then I immediately run it back through again, and it says, hell, we said we didn't know that, And usually every time I keep running it back, the more I run it back, the more frustrated I get. And that's frustration. And here it says, well, as soon as we see that, we should cut that. We don't have that knowledge. And they said we should cut off our tapes. And we can plug into another source of information within ourselves. And this is within us. Deep down in us, we can plug into this inner source. And a source of all knowledge and all power. And the way we do this, he said, we ask God for inspiration, intuitive thought, our decision. When we do that, we relax and take it easy. He says we don't struggle. Now, if we continue we don't relax and take it easy. If we still wrestle with this thing in our mind, then we haven't really turned it over. If we turn it over to God, relax and take it easy, get it out of our mind, probably go occupy our life with something else simple. Go wash the dishes, cut the grass, wash the car, forget all about it, forget about it. Then after a period of time, he said, we'll be surprised how the right answer will come after we have tried this for a while. And what used to be a hunch or occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of our mind. We have all had hunches in our lives. We had that many, many years in our lives, but we weren't able to use those things. If we begin to practice step 11 on a daily basis and use this valuable suggestion here, what used to be an occasional hunch, it's become a working part of our lives. We can make this work at any time we want to by using this direction if we practice at it and work at it over a daily basis. And I had a lot of hunches, but I never, I didn't know how to use these things. But I can make this an instrument in my life if I relax and take it easy, don't struggle, and turn it over to God. Sometimes an inner voice speaks to me. Sometimes it comes from other people. I remember when I first began to use this, and I would say, why don't you call old Charlie? Or somebody else, and I'd call old Charlie, and Charlie would say, why don't you do this, and it would work out fine. And I would say to myself, boy, I'm sure glad I thought to call Charlie. But I didn't. At the time I was wrestling with it, Charlie wasn't even in my mind. Or when I would relax and take it easy, later on, an hour, 2 or 3 hours later, I would think about it, bring that subject up again, and I would have a new perspective of it. And we have to practice this, but this is something a part of every human life. And this is a thing that we and God has 10,000 answers to every problem I have. 10,000 beautiful answers, I know. But still yet, He will allow me the privilege of wrestling with it on self. He won't enter into my life. But if I can make this decision and turn it over to Him and relax and take it easy, I can receive the direction. Then I can apply these directions in my life to carry out. I have answers to all. We have access, really, through this step to answers for every problem we have. But still yet, many of us will choose at times to struggle with life on the basis of self-will.
I think this is how we would gradually, slowly, but surely develop this sixth sense of direction. The information's already there. If we can just remove the barrier and let the information come to the surface, then we do in many cases intuitively know how to handle those situations which used to baffle us. And this is not something new. You know, we've all experienced this from time to time throughout our lifetime. Many times I've had that hunch, I've had that knowledge, I've had that come from somewhere that says, I really think you ought to do it like this. And then I'd look at that and I'd think, well, no, fear would keep me from doing it like that. And then a week or a month later I'd look back and I'd say, man, I wish I'd have done it that way. Hell, I knew to do that in the first place. And sometimes that information said, I really don't think you ought to do this. But then my drives and my forces would keep me going and I'd go right ahead and do it. And in a week or a month later I'd look back and I'd say, man, I wish I hadn't have done that. Hell, I knew not to do it in the first place. We've had these hunches throughout our lifetime. And where'd that information come from? Where'd that knowledge come from? It was not a working part of our mind at that particular time. And I think this is what they would refer to as classic Western meditation, where you have a problem, you can't decide what to do, and you ask God for the right thought or direction, and then it says, relax and take it easy, and we're quite often surprised how the right answers will come. And in another form of meditation, they would take this relax and take it easy as to mean you would go off somewhere and perhaps lie down or listen to music or make your mind an entire blank and listen for the word to come in. Now, I don't know about the rest of you all, but I can't make my mind an entire blank. When I get up in the morning and that sucker turns on, it runs all day long until I go to sleep at night. And I've never been able to make it a blank. About the only thing I can do with it is this. I can ask God for the right thought or direction. And then my relax and take it easy is to go off somewhere and do something else. Get my mind off of that subject and get my mind onto another subject. And maybe I'll go fishing. Or maybe I'll go paint the house or mow the grass or anything to get my mind off that subject. And then when my mind quits churning with that subject, then I'm surprised how often the right answers will come. An hour later, a day later, a week later, somewhere that information seems to pop up in my mind. Now, the information, I think, has always been here because we do have access to that knowledge and power, and this is a method to let it come to the surface. And if I can't get it from me, then I've got to remember that God dwells within you also. And you have access to the same knowledge and power that I have. And if I can't get it from me, maybe if I would start listening to you, I might be able to get it from you. Now, used to, I never listened to other people. When other people would be talking to me, I never heard what they said because I was thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as they get through. Today, I try my best not to do that. Today, I try to listen very carefully to whoever's talking to me on any subject they're talking about because they're just as apt to have the answer for me as I am to have it myself. And I'm absolutely amazed at how sometimes you give me the very answer I was wrestling with last week, and I don't know where you got it, how come you gave it to me, but there it is. And I said, my golly, that's what I needed to know. Now, Joe and I got into a group of people some time ago that they had gone the other route with this meditation. They had gone the Eastern route. And they had carried it to the point where they had their meditation tapes and they had their music and they had their mattresses. And when they got ready to meditate, they would all lay down on the floor on these mattresses, and they would hold hands and they would listen to this music and meditate. And I said, I don't really think that's what the big book means. And I said, if you're anything like me, and you put me on the floor with mattresses listening to music and members of the opposite sex in the room, I'm going to meditate all right. But it may not be on the right subject matter. And we suggested they might not ought to do that. And they didn't seem to want to listen to that. A year and a half later, we got to go back to the same group. And it had gone from 150 members down to about 10. And there had been several of them get drunk, 3 or 4 divorces, just blew the whole thing wide apart. Fortunately, the cool heads stayed in and hung on, and now the group is starting back again. But I'll guarantee you they're doing a different form of meditation today, too. I think this is classic Western meditation. And it really does work. That's the amazing thing to me. When I first read it, I thought, that's silly, that's childish stuff, that can't work. And maybe it won't work the first few times we try it. But it's like anything else. If we try it and practice at it over and over and over, gradually it becomes a working part of the mind. Gradually that sixth sense begins to develop. Gradually we're able to get direction other ways than just through sight, feel, touch, hearing, and etc. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. This is a fourth dimension of existence. This is a place that I didn't know that we could possibly get to. But we really can. We don't have to face indecision anymore. Because we've got a source now that will give us the knowledge we need as well as the power to carry it out, whatever it might be. And this is one suggestion on how to bring that knowledge to the surface and be able to use it. He said having just made conscious contact with God, it's not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration we come to rely upon it. When I first began to use this, I usually could figure out what it was I wanted to do. And then I would ask God for an inspiration or a thought of some type to tell me that's okay. And sure enough, I could con myself into believing I'd heard it, and I'd go ahead and do it. But I finally find that this thing really works. If I practice at it, it really does work. So?
And this takes, if we practice this on a daily basis, most people that tell us about the personality of the mind, if we do this over a period of time constantly, it's a matter of 3 weeks. They talk about 21 days that we can develop things. I think the secret is the constant daily day after day. And I see the frustration and the lack of growth when people can do it for a week and stop, and then do it for another week and stop. And you see them after 4 or 5 years, they're still at the same place. But if we can have a constant, just a constant day-to-day, working at it, chipping away with it every day, is the way we develop these things within our makeup.
You can't lose weight by dieting for 7 days and then going back to eating what you've always eaten before. And eat that for a week or two and then go back and diet for another 7 days. To lose weight, we got to do the constant thing day after day after day. To build muscle in our body, it takes constant day after day after day. To develop this sixth sense, it takes constant practice, day after day after day. And if we'll continue to do it, even though it may feel foolish at first, after a while we begin to realize that it is working for us.
Okay. Now you come to the third set suggestion. He gives us some suggestions on prayer, some definitely valuable suggestions. We usually conclude a period of meditation with a prayer that would be shown all through the day what our next step is to be. That we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will, and are careful to make no request for ourselves. We may ask for ourselves, however, as others will be helpful. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing it. It doesn't work, and we need to see why. And here, he gives us some suggestions about fashioning a new prayer attitude or a new prayer life. As Charlie said, he had a lot of problems. I had no conceptions of whatever I had wasn't working. And my early conceptions of prayer were, I had to develop one that worked within the AA way of life. And we asked that we make our prayers a simple thing. And Bill said that, I always, just like Bill, tried to sway God's will and lift my petty needs. That's all I use prayer for. It doesn't really work. And there's no need that I don't need to list the things that I want from God. And if I did that many years ago, I would have sold myself short. You know, there is no way I could imagine the things that I got from God. And I'm sure today that God has more things that He wants me to have than is beyond my imagination. So if I produce my list completely, I would be shorting myself. But in the old days, before coming to AA, my prayers were, I listed my petty needs and tried to sway God's will. And I think about my earlier prayer days. I look back on it. my prayers were like a list of Santa Claus. You know, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me this, give me that, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I was really playing God. I was ordering God around. And I know today that I don't have to do this. All we need to do is to ask for God's will in our lives and the power to carry that out. And we don't need to, if we have our God's directions, then we can get the things in life, that we can work our way through the problems of life. Now, I developed a early prayer life, and I'm not knocking, I don't knock my church either. Charlie come from that Southern Baptist church. You know, he comes from Oklahoma, and they got more Baptists than they have people. I came from one of those Southern Methodist churches. You know, I was afraid that Baptist church, they'd drown you.
And Methodists, they just kind of sprinkle, you know. They don't really get with it.
But it's pretty much the same. And in my church is where I developed, and it wasn't what, I'm not saying what was said was wrong, but it's what I heard in my interpretation. I interpreted most things wrong all my life. But you know, there was a man there that would pray every Sunday morning for us, and I would think I'd never do step 11 until I think how much he influenced my early prayer life. And this is where I developed. Now, I was just a kid, and I had to be on that pew every Sunday morning after Sunday school. I was just a kid, and my feet wouldn't even touch the floor. But I remember this old brother, his name was Brother Sanders. He always seen me. I remember him in a brown suit. And he used to have a big watch bob that was gold, and it used to be a red stone in it that dangled off his vest when he got down to pray every Sunday morning. I was just a kid. And I would hear him get down to pray, and he prayed for us every Sunday morning. It took him about a half an hour. We was in pretty bad shape, the whole bunch. And, you know, he would, talking about listing our petty needs, this man would ask God for everything, I believe, that was in heaven. You know, he would say, God bless the president, the sick and the poor and the shut in, the ladies' aid, the Boy Scouts. He'd just go over, God, do this, bless this, do this, give us this, do this. Just go on, you know, and I was learning it from him, you know. And down in the end, he always closed with one final statement. It's burned in my mind yet today, I remember it. His final statement was, in God, that in our haste which we have omitted, please grant us that also. In other words, we left out something, we want that too, you know. You know, well, you cut your teeth on something like this, you throw it in your life, and you work at it, and it really doesn't work. Then you get confused, and you throw it down, and you kind of turn your back on these things. Come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're faced with prayer, and you go back to the same way. And I think many of us, our big book teaches us, you know, to look at our prayers. It gives us a way, a suggestion for a prayer life according to our new way of life, because our old prayer life hasn't worked. And maybe I see a lot of difficulty in people that haven't developed a healthy prayer life for a good AA life. And we have this very difficult sometimes not to tell God what we want. It's very difficult for me yet today not to list my petty needs and not to tell God to do this. And I don't need to do this. But yet, you know, we waste a lot of time doing this. And it really clutters up my communication with God and to receiving His directions in life. But all we really need to do is pray for God's directions and the power to carry those. Those are the essentials. Those are the foundation of our. Those are the things that we don't need anything else. And if we receive God's directions in our life and the power to carry out those directions, we can be successful living on a daily basis. And this does take time. It takes practice. It takes daily times of reforming our prayers and honing them down and focusing them in and developing a healthy prayer life in the context of the AA program. Okay. If circumstance warranted, we asked our wives, our friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination required a definite morning devotion, we'll attend to that also. If not, members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a set prayers which emphasize the principles we are discussing. There are many helpful books. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one priest, minister, or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. You know, and this is true. These people have had a lot more experience in prayer and meditation than we have. And we can learn from them. So keep an open mind. And he said, use some of these things. You know, we always talk about, you know, AA approved literature. The Bible's not AA approved literature, but it's a pretty good book. You know, as we go through the day, and here's what we do. Now he's going to tell us what we do throughout the day. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. And this is a whole thing. Again, it's working against ourselves. And usually when we got doubtful or agitated, when I got agitated or doubtful, I used to speed up. This thing says slow down. You know, pause. And this is good, and I can recollect my mind, and I can focus. And I learned this many years ago. I was working at one time in my life. I was working in a large company for a maintenance man, and in the maintenance work for large corporations, they expect you to do everything. They expect you to do a lot of things you can't do. They want you to fix everything, and nobody can fix everything. And I remember I would get into a lot of situations sometimes. Every once in a while I'd get into situations working on something that I didn't know what I was doing. And I would just get things balled up and and everybody would be saying, ain't you got that fixed? So when am I going to get that? And I learned a great thing about me. I found out one of the quickest ways for me to get a job done sometimes was to lay my tools down and go get a cup of coffee. It seems stupid. I'm sitting out there drinking coffee saying, this is the fastest way. Well, when I come back after drinking that cup of coffee and been gone for 15 or 20 minutes and look at the same job, I was about to tear the thing up. I had the pieces all in the wrong place, but I couldn't see that. When I come back, I had a whole new perspective, and I said, my God, look what was I doing? You know, and I could see everything different. And we apply this right into our lives. It works the same way. You know, a lot of times we can't see the forest for the trees. When we get doubtful or agitated, you know, this is not the best state of mind to really deal with that. We have to pause and take it easy and relax sometimes. And then we can look at things in different perspective. I mean, because God, this inner power can give us the truth can come to surface, and we can see things in a different light. We constantly remind ourselves, and this is throughout the day, throughout each day, we constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show, and we need that bad, you know, because we alcoholics, we love to run the show, particularly when everything is going good. When things is in trouble, we like for God to direct our lives. I hear that one Charlie's been telling that guy that went to the racetrack, and he had a lot of problems, and he had no business there gambling anyway. He didn't have much money. In fact, he'd been there all day, and he had spent his wife's rent money and the grocery money and everything. And it was the last race, and he got in trouble. So he said, God, look here now, I want to talk to you. He said, you know, I'm in trouble. And he said, I want you to help me out, pick me out a horse, because I am in trouble. I ain't got but $10 left, and I got to get my money back. I can't go home like this. He said, I know you can help me. So just about time, he saw a light blinking on the 5 horse. And he said, one of the light bulbs was out. He said, that's my signal. So he went down and put his money on the 5 horse. And the horses come out, and they got in the gates, and he said, well, God, I know you don't hang around these places much. I want to tell you how to do this. He said, if I ought to let him stand kind of still. and rest himself. The old horse gets good still. That's good, you know. And then he said, now, when the gates open, let him get out good, you know. So the gate opened and they broke out and he got out pretty good. And he kind of got out in front and he said, God, don't get him too far. Put him in about third. So the old horse come back to third and just running along there. Until they got on around by the third turn, he said, now God, bring him on up. And bring him on up, you know. Old horse went up to the front and he said, now let him go. The old horse got out there 5 lengths, 10 lengths. And he was right at the wire, and the old boy said, now I can take over now, God. He said, run, you son of a bitch, run. Yeah. And, you know, that's the way we are. You know, we'll take it over when we get near the wire.
He surprised me. I'd never heard that one either.
Okay. Now, then we are in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, and self-pity and foolish decisions. If we can get these other things out of our mind, then we're in less danger of excitement, anger, fear, self-pity, and foolish decisions. You know, we've been running our lives off of that. This is why we used to think something wrong with our minds. We run our lives off of garbage. Become much more efficient. Become much more efficient. In other words, when we use our minds, we can get more living in a day. When we live off our emotions, you know, it's a hard day and we don't get much done, and we just wore out every day. But by using step 11 and practicing this in our life, we become much more efficient. We can pack more into one day of life. We can get more done. You know, we do not tire so easily, and I love that. You know, God, the mind burns up emotions. Our mind burns up tons of energy, and we're just spinning our wheels. We're not going anywhere. But we become much more efficient. We do not tire so easy for not burning up energy foolishly when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works. It really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, and we are undisciplined people. So we let God discipline us the way we have just outlined. We let God discipline us through these definite and valuable suggestions. What we do at night, what we do in the morning. We pause when we have indecisions. We ask in prayer meditation, simple prayer meditation. And through practicing these definite suggestions on those pages, God can direct and discipline our lives. We are undisciplined people. But that is not all. There is action and more action. Faith without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12.
Whenever I tell Lou Bell that Joe said son of a bitch from behind the podium, he's going to be in bad trouble.
You're going to get me.
I think we better take about a 10 or 15 minute break, and then let's come back and we'll finish up on step 12.